Great evening, International President, past International Directors, past Region Advisors, past District Governors, District Leaders, incoming District Leaders, Club Leaders, Toastmasters, and fellow guests. Our speaker tonight has been a Toastmaster for the last 20 years. In 2014, he failed to win election to the Board of Directors. Yet 8 years later, he was inaugurated as our international president. To get there, he had to work hard to improve himself and to apply a lot of lessons. However, there are some lessons that stood out more than others. Tonight, he will share some invaluable lessons as he speaks about from Kuala, Lumpur to Washington, D.C. Matt Kinsey, our Toastmasters International President, will be speaking from Innovative Planning, Level 5, Prepared to Speak Professionally. His time tonight is 10 to 15 minutes, plus Q&A as time permits. Brace yourself. Get ready to take some copious notes as we hear wisdom, experience, and time-tested lessons by Matt Kinsey. Let's give a warm round of applause. And my educator round of applause. Some Zoom reactions and an amazing District 12 Speakers Bureau Toastmasters welcome to Matt Kinsey as he approaches the virtual lectern. Matt?
Thank you, Dr. Jones. And the chair asked me to extend my time, so it will be 20 to 30 minutes for the timer. So everyone's aware of that. As the introduction said, in 2014, I stood for election to the Board of Directors, something that past International Director Greg Scott did successfully, something that past International Director Karen Lucas did successfully. And I didn't make it. And it had me questioning things for a few hours. You know, have you ever lost an election? Well, in 2014, that was the first time I'd ever lost an election for anything. It was the first time that my blind spots had gotten in the way of accomplishing something that I wanted to accomplish. And I had to examine that and discover what had happened. Now, within an hour after the election, I had members coming up to me and saying, Matt, please run again. And by the time we got to dinner and the president's inauguration, I had made up my mind I was going to run again. So I took a couple of days that I was planning to go to board orientation for and, went around Malaysia a little bit. And then I got home and I started making phone calls right away. Started calling people, what could I have done differently? And the advice I got was really pretty poor. I mean, well, Matt, you just ran into a better candidate. Matt, the two best candidates were in your region and you just didn't get enough votes. Like I wanted to hear that. Okay, that didn't really help me. A year later, I submitted my paperwork again to run. There's a 2-year time cycle for when you run. So I submitted my paperwork to start the process again. And I called some of these same individuals back, said, hey, just want to let you know, I'm running again. Do you have any advice? And boy, did the answers change. All of a sudden, those people who said, well, Matt, you just ran a good campaign, said, well, Matt, here's some things I think you should have done differently. Or here's some things I think got in your way. And it was eye-opening. And what I realized from that, more than anything else, was that reflection requires separation. See, there were two things going on. One is I was still too emotionally connected to the loss. And I think the people I was talking to understood that. They understood that I was still feeling some pain over the loss. And so emotion is great. I mean, emotion drives behavior. But when you're trying to reflect and you're trying to figure out what went wrong and what could go better, that is a logical process. And emotion gets in the way, especially if you're holding on to pain or anger or fear, as our earlier speaker spoke about tonight. The other thing was that people need to process. Now, some of us are very quick processors. Some people are more deliberate processors, and it's not a sign of intelligence at all. It has nothing to do with intelligence. It has to do with how people process information in order to feel that they've got the most information that they need to make a decision. And everybody needs to process. And people had had a chance themselves to think about what I had done. So what I'm going to share tonight are some of the barriers that I had to overcome in my pursuit. Now, some of you will look at these barriers and go, wow, I'm surprised. Some of you will look at these barriers and go, yeah, I've experienced that as well. And some of you may not relate to all of the barriers. In fact, no one, I don't think, will relate to all of the barriers. But I think most of you will relate to at least one to give it some thought about how you might be able to apply this in your life. So let's go with that first one, which was the first thing I heard. And it was a pretty painful one. Matt, who are you? What do you mean? I spent hours talking to people on the phone. I spent days doing interviews with people, 15 minutes after 15 minutes. What do you mean you don't know me? What do you mean, who am I? What they said was, Matt, we can tell you're a smart guy, but we don't know who you are inside. And when I examined it, one of my good friends was a district director in Melbourne, Australia, and she'd actually worked on my campaign. And I called her up and I said, Catherine, you know, people are telling me I've got this barrier up and they don't understand and that I push people away. Do I do that? And now this is one of my best friends. She's like, oh my, yes, you do. And I was like, but we connected so quickly. She goes, Matt, I saw something in you that attracted me to create a friendship with you. Matt, most people won't do that. They won't put in the effort. And when I examined it, it turned out to be something that happened to me in high school when I was 16 years old that allowed me or caused me to create a barrier between me and other people to protect myself emotionally. Or at least that's what I thought I was doing. But what I was doing instead was preventing people from seeing who I am. Some people call it transparency. Some people call it vulnerability. And we all need some barriers up, even from our most intimate partners. But the more you can let people in to see who you are, the better they will respond to you. That was my first powerful lesson. So your most precious currency is your authenticity. When people know who you are and they perceive that your actions come out of who you are and that you're not trying to be somebody else, more of them want to be around you. And when somebody doesn't, it doesn't bother you as much because you can really sit there and go, you know what, I've done this. I'm a pretty good guy and they're missing out. And I'm okay with that. But I have enough people who love me and care about me that I'm going to be just fine without their added attention. I don't need it. Would I like it? Sure, I'd like it, but I don't need it. So if you read the article about me in the August News, in the August magazine, you may have read that I'm a cyclist. I've done over 260,000 miles, 400,000 kilometers in my lifetime. And one of my jobs was on our racing team was a lead out man. Now, if you've ever watched the Tour de France, the lead out man is not the guy who wins the race. The lead out man is the guy who comes up to about 500, 400 meters to go and peels off. So the sprinter only has to sprint that last 30 seconds or so to win the race. I'm coming down a home stretch and I'm in perfect position. My sprinter is 1 inch off my back wheel. I am right in the center. We have just a slight lead. I've got enough room to peel out, and out of the corner of my eye, Dr. Val, I saw the most gorgeous woman I have ever seen in my life. And I glanced at her. And 35 riders went down that day. including my entire team. Now, afterwards, my team sprinter, who's also the team coach, came looking for me, as you can imagine. Picked ourselves up and he's looking for me. Now, the only way to describe him is he was a California surfer. He was like, yo, dude, what happened there? And I was like, I don't know, it's in position, just went down. He's like, dude, you got distracted. And I was like, yeah. He's like, all right, man, it happens. I just got one question for you. Was she worth it? Now, here's a woman I saw out of the corner of my eye for a split second, and my distraction took me and my team out of action. See, distraction equals out of action. And as a leader and as a candidate, the first time I got distracted, I started chasing shiny balls instead of doing the core work that needed to be done. I started trying to come up with fancy ideas about how to solve Toastmasters problems instead of connecting with members on a real level. See, I wasn't focused on the right actions. I wasn't focused on the mission. I was focused on what would happen after I accomplished the mission. And as leaders, we have to be careful about that as well, because distraction does take you out of action. Do you react or respond? And what do I mean by that? So a quick poll. All right, I'm going to be a little dangerous here, but data science tells me I'm probably right. So I'm going to ask the women in the audience an answer. If you go to your significant other and say, I have a problem, and you start a conversation, how many of you want your partner to solve that problem? Raise your hands. Okay, well, I can't see what's in the room, but online, I'm not seeing a single hand up. Now, men, if your significant other comes to you and says, I have a problem, how many of you want to solve that problem? All right, and if you're not raising your hands, that's okay. I'm not going to call on you, but I would just ask you to question your intentions. Now, what science tells us, what research tells us, is that on average, women aren't looking for a solution. They're looking for someone to listen to them and to empathize with them. If they want a solution, they are going to go to their other female friends. Right? Yeah, okay, I see some of you nodding. They're going to go to their other female friends. They're not going to come to you in most cases. They want somebody to listen to them. So this creates a dichotomy. Well, the same thing is true as a candidate for the board of directors and Toastmasters, and maybe even for club and district. See, what I was doing is I was reacting. A district would come to me and describe a problem, and I would give them a solution. And I thought that was what I should be doing. Hey, Matt, we're having a problem with this. Oh, well, here's something that should work for you. Oh, okay, great. But what they wanted was this. They wanted listening in the middle. And they didn't necessarily want a solution. They want it to be heard. And that's a response instead of a reaction. So the point is does the question require an answer or a conversation? In politics, in Toastmasters politics, most of the time it requires a conversation. So what do I do now? If someone comes to me, and I don't do this as a smart aleck way, but if someone comes to me and they have a question, they're trying to solve a problem, I start asking a lot of questions. Tell me about what you've tried. Most important question, what's your desired outcome? If you tell me you're having a problem with an area director, well, are you trying to get them to correct their behavior? Are you trying to get them to resign? Or are you just want them out no matter what? Well, those require different solutions to get your desired outcome. And if I don't know what the desired outcome is, I can't possibly give you any advice. What have you tried? Have you ever started giving someone advice and like, well, I tried that, we tried that. Now, sometimes that's an excuse, but sometimes that's the real situation. They've tried exactly what you're suggesting and it didn't work. And you look like a fool, or at least partially one. So the question is, does it require an answer? And then if I feel it's appropriate at the end, I'll actually ask, are you looking for some advice? And if they are, then I'll provide it. And I just had this happen a couple of weeks ago with the district director. She asked me for some time, had a conversation. She told me what's going on. I said, would you like some advice? She said, yes. I gave her some advice. She chose not to follow it. She chose to take a different path. I'm okay with that. Okay. I'm not offended that she chose a different path. It worked out for her. And that path actually came from some questions I'd asked her earlier. She told me later that the question that she answered one way the first time she thought about it and came up with a different answer, that it wasn't worth the fight and she was going to let it go. Now, this was the important one. I called past international president Pat Johnson. Some of you have met her, some of you know her. Fabulous lady. She was the chair of the ILC in 2014 that had decided not to nominate me for office. Rightly so, based on what I understand now. And I called her and I said, Pat, after I got some general things, I said, Pat, you've observed me for a while. Do you have any specific advice for me? And she said, well, Matt, in my experience, many candidates for the board, they're thinking and leading with their head instead of their heart. And I'm taking notes, being a good little listener and trying to get those lessons. And all of a sudden she goes, Matt, put your pencil down. I'm talking to you. You need to get out of your head. And guess what taking notes is getting in your head. Okay. She goes, you need to get out of your head and into your heart. Now, I'll be honest with you. I told this story in front of Pat Johnson one time, and she came after me. She came up to me, not after me, but she came up to me later and said, Matt, I wasn't that harsh with you. And I'm like, Pat, it makes a better story. Just go with it. So the question is, are you leading with your head? Results, objectives, strategies. That's what I was doing. That's the household I was raised in, that you solve problems with your head. Okay. Academic success meant more than any of my other successes. All right. And my successes in life had come with my brain power, exercised in an academic way. So that's my fallback when I was under stress. And leading with your head is results and objectives and strategies. And it's important as a leader that we lead with our head. Esther just talked about some aspects of leading your head. They knew what their objectives are. They knew what the results were. They knew what the strategies were. And then they had to execute those, which is where leading with your hands comes in. It's doing the work with the team, leading by example, task-oriented, high standards. Esther talked about that as well earlier tonight, how they had high standards. They had an 85% threshold. Are the tasks getting done? Is everyone doing their part? Is she setting an example as a district director? Or are you leading with your heart? People, relationships, and connection. Now, the best leaders do all three. I know people who've worked on Esther's team, and they have a good relationship with her today. They still enjoy being around her. That tells me that she took care of this aspect of her leadership as well. But what does this really mean? So let me just give you the best example I can. Several years ago, I was at a conference in Scottsdale, Arizona, led by the late, great Bob Proctor, the Toronto Tornado. If you don't know who he is, he was the producer behind the movie The Secret. Okay. Fabulous guy. And over lunch, the MC comes up to us and goes, ladies and gentlemen, over lunch, I want you to go out on the streets of Scottsdale, Arizona, find a stranger and take them to lunch, and then come back and tell us about it. Now there's 800 people in the room descending on the streets of Scottsdale, Arizona, and I am sitting in front of this restaurant trying to get a stranger to go to lunch with me. and it was not going well. Now, those of you who know me know I am a get her done kind of guy. If you give me a task, I'm going to get it done. And I walk up to people and say, hey, I'd like to take you to lunch. And they're like, no, 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 and some of them running away. I don't know if they thought I was asking them on a date, trying to get them to sell Amway or convert them to my religion, but I was frustrated. And I had a task I needed to get done, and it wasn't getting done. And that, frankly, that is unacceptable. And I sat down on a bench and I said, this is ridiculous. I can't get anyone to go to lunch with me. I'm going to fail at this task. Then I heard this voice start going in the back of my head. I'm trying to ignore it, but all of a sudden I realize it's my mother's voice. And you got to listen to your mom, right? And what I heard was, Matt, in whatever you do, find your purpose. Now, I know that's different from what Simon Sinek and everybody else says about finding your purpose and then going out and do. No, she was telling me, you're doing something. Why are you doing it? What is the purpose behind it? And so I decided I wanted to take a veteran to lunch. I know many women have served, but in that moment, I pictured an older gentleman, kind of balding white hair like Greg Scott there, and very wise face, kind of like Greg Scott there. A cane, I don't think Greg's got a cane, and a ball cap. And I heard the word Arizona, but I'm in Scottsdale, Arizona. I stood up, took a couple of steps, and approaching me, Esther, was exactly the gentleman I saw. A little better looking than Greg. White hair, a wise face, a cane, and a ball cap that said USS Arizona. And I walked up to him. I said, sir, would you please do the honor of going to lunch with me? And he looked at me for a second. He goes, why? Well, this is a good start. He's not running away from me. And I said, well, I noticed your cap. I made a decision a few minutes ago. I wanted to take a veteran to lunch. Would you please go in and have lunch with me? And he looked at me, thought for a second. He says, well, my mama told me never turn down a free lunch. So we went inside, we ordered our food, started having a conversation. Waiter brought the food, we're talking. And finally, I looked at him and said, Bill, I saw your cap. Did you know somebody on the Arizona? He goes, know someone? Hell, boy, I was on the Arizona. He goes, I will never, ever forget that morning. It was around assembly time, and I was on deck like everybody else. And I heard the sirens go off. And all I could think was, here comes another drill. But then I realized that everybody was pointing out over the horizon. And it wasn't our boys. The next minutes felt like hours and seconds at the same time, as there were bombs, torpedoes in the water. The ship got hit, the stack behind me blew up, and I was thrown into the waters. And as I was treading water, trying to keep my face up, I watched my ship sink to the bottom of Pearl Harbor. I lost 2,300 brothers that day. Finally, the silence was broken as the waiter came by with the check. He placed it on the table, and I reached out to pick it up. As I picked it up, it was snatched out of my hands. And I looked at Bill and I said, I told you, I wanted to take you to lunch today. He looked at me and said, yeah, I know what you said. So what? The only thing I could think to say in that moment was, well, my mama also told me never turn down a free lunch. See, I almost missed this moment because I didn't understand the assignment. The assignment was not to check a box. The assignment was for just a few moments to connect with another human being. And those moments changed me. Now, Bill has since passed, and I will always honor that short time we spent together. That, more than any other reason, is when you lead a team. And when I decided to run for international director again, I decided to start with my heart. What about you? Do you start with your heart? Do you make sure your team has good relationships, a good foundation, so that when the rocky times come, and they will come as a leader, and they have come on this board of directors as we have struggled with the times of COVID, but because of the relationships we forged early in the year, we were able to withstand that test of excessive hours, excessive high impact decisions. Now, I've said this before, and I will say it again. Our voters were right to not vote me in 2014. And if I had been elected, I would not be standing in front of you as your international president. In fact, I would never have stood in front of any of you at any time as an international president. Start with your heart. Now, in 2016, I was fortunate to be elected. And this process of reflection and action on that has become a part of my life. It has become a part of who I am. Thank you for the opportunity to lead Toastmasters. Thank you for those of you who have sent me encouraging notes throughout the year. I've received several from people on this calls in response to magazine articles, in response to statements I've sent out. And I appreciate that because that's what makes the weight of this organization a little bit lighter. So I'm honored to be your international president, and I'm looking forward to seeing, hopefully, most of you at the conference this weekend. Mr. Toastmaster.